Hi, friend. Logan Clements here with the Better Events podcast. And in this week's episode, we are diving into how to be an event contractor and some of our tips and tricks for you. This is a part 2 to last week's episode where we talked about how to hire event contractors and work with event contractors. This time, Mary and I are putting on our contractor hat and sharing with you some of our best practices about how you can make a positive impact in your pitching, how to talk about your rates, and really show up and put your best foot forward when you're on site. So without further ado, let's get into the episode.
Welcome to the Better Events podcast. Join two event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. In this podcast, you will learn about event strategy and actions that you can use today as an event host, planner, or manager. Hear directly from the people who are creating innovative and inspiring events today and tomorrow, and grow your business along the way. Now, let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events podcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Better Events podcast. We are thrilled, as always, to be with you. And today's episode is going to be kind of fun because we are talking all about how to be a contractor. So in episode 245, we talked about hiring event contractors. Now we're talking about how to be one. So this is the flip side of it. This is part 2. But before we get into it, we have our conversation starter for today. So Logan, what is a tiny luxury that feels non-negotiable right now?
Ooh, this was a good one. My brain goes into like 17 different places because luxury is such a broad term. Right now, based on the season of life I'm in where I'm traveling as much as I am, I will say my airline status is a tiny luxury. Mary's laughing at me. That feels non-negotiable right now. And I'm not going to lie. I think of it, Mary, especially with you entering your parenting era, that there's a moment where every time I'm sitting in my upgraded seat and I see parents with all the things they have to carry going by, and I'm like, Logan, savor this, because there's no guarantee that you keep your status at year in and year out. So yes, if you haven't heard, listeners, I'm a Delta diva, Delta Airlines. If you want to be a sponsor of this podcast, we'd love to have you because I love my Sky Miles, status. I'm a diamond member, so I'm up there. I get early boarding, all that fun stuff. And they're very good if you're looking at an airline to get in with. They're very good at free upgrades as you climb in status. So there's my plug. Mary, how about you? What's your tiny free Delta Airlines commercial right there?
I'm laughing about your plug.
What's your tiny luxury that feels non-negotiable right now?
I think that this is extremely tiny, but I'm going to say candles. I love a candle. I've been like a candle person the last couple of years, but specifically lately, there's something, I think it's because it's winter. It's just something about lighting it and you're like, oh, cozy. And it's the simplest little thing that makes me really happy and it makes me feel luxurious, even though it's just a candle. So that's mine.
The power of scents. And I also feel like as we move into like springtime, that's when more people as it's still not warm here in Seattle yet, but like then you get those nice fresh flowers and things like that can feel nice as a small luxury. Well, Mary, you already teased a bit about it, but listeners, why we picked this topic is it's a flip side of episode 245. So if you haven't gone back and listened to last week's, never fear, you can listen to this first and then go back. But we kind of approached it from the two-pronged sides of being an event contractor. One, the hiring side. We really dove into that last week, especially some red flags of how we hire people, why we hire people. If you were a contractor, it'd still be helpful to listen to that. And then now we're going to put on our actual contractor hat, which Mary was definitely more on the hiring side from last week. And now I feel like I'm much more on I live in contractor land. So excited to dive in here about just some of the tips and tricks we have for you, whether you're seasoned or just getting into it. So Mary, first one, let's remind folks, I'm interested, our definition might be slightly different than what we said last week, but reminder, how do we define a contractor in events?
I think last time we talked about it being someone who is helping at your event or being hired to support your event during a certain time frame. There's usually a limit on it, some project, some scope related to it. So there's an end time. And it's someone who comes in and is sometimes specialized in a certain role, or they are just, let's say, an event professional who is able to come in and help in a lot of different roles. So that's how I would simplify it. Logan, what would you add?
Yeah, I think just the only take, you're not getting any benefits. That's usually the definition of being full-time versus contractor. And if you want to get real technical, usually, that has a firm scope of work around it. So specific days, specific pre-work that you're doing would make you legally a contractor. I do want to call this out too because it feels more relevant for contractors, is I have had state by state, depending on where the company that is hiring you to contract is, they have different legal requirements. I will shout out like California. Both Mary and I are currently located in Washington State, but California has some super strict labor laws, great for contractors, really tough for companies. And so that is where sometimes those lines can blur. You'll have some agencies that maybe want to have you be a W-2 employee while you're still verbally called a contractor, like the way we talk about it. Legally, they're actually bringing you on as like a part-time employee. And that's just because I think California has a pretty strict labor laws. And this again is where the company that hired you is based, not necessarily the event. So like I've been hired by a company from California, I'm in Washington State, but we're doing an event in Colorado. I would still have to follow California labor laws because that's where that business is based. So a little in the weeds there at the start, but getting you thinking.
No, I think it's important because I have gotten hired as a W-2 before and I'm like, well, I don't wanna. No, thanks. I'm okay. But like legally, yeah, sometimes it just has to happen that way. So very interesting. Not a red flag because you can still do the type of work. You're just kind of a W-2. Alrighty. So Logan, is there a difference from freelancing versus like being a staff person?
I mean, I would say what I love about freelancing and contracting is I feel like I get to speed date companies. I get to jump in and get a part of their systems and be a part of their team for a set period of time. And then I get to skedaddle and I don't have to be there all the time. And that's a little different than if you're a full-time staffer or a worker for the company. I also think as a freelancer, I have more controls over my schedule of like I don't have control maybe of what time I have to be on site. That's set usually by the person who hires you, but I can decide, do I want to be in back-to-back events for 3 months in a row? Or do I want to take one event a month? Or we know some friends of the pod who only have X days a month they want to be on site. And that's something that when you're a staffer or work full-time for somebody, you don't usually have control. I'd like to think more modern bosses are taking into account time for rest and things like that. But that was one of my personal reasons why I went freelance, was I just was getting burnt out. I was working too many long days, too many weekends, and then coming back in on Monday and just having to have a regular week, even though we just worked through the weekend. And I didn't feel like I had the power to really control my schedule and set any boundaries. And being a freelancer, I felt like I'd have that. Mary, what would you add?
Yeah, I love what you said. I think one of the biggest things is just that difference in instability. That's what I've had people say to me for sure, is that they prefer to be full-time, which always blows my mind because I'm a very entrepreneurial person, as you all know. And so when I hear that, I always am trying to convince people to go off and do their own thing, but they're like, no, I want the steady paycheck. I want the benefits. So I'm like, okay, I respect that. So a little bit of a difference, of course, there, Logan, like you were saying. And then I think there's also a level of different responsibilities. So I know that I love to freelance because I only have a piece of the puzzle sometimes, versus now I feel like I'm in charge of the whole thing. And sometimes it's nice just to have a piece of the puzzle. So the last thing I would say too are just like you can have more boundaries, I feel like, obviously as a freelancer, but not necessarily as a staff person. You kind of just have to do your job. So that's my biased opinion probably, but that's what I would say as well.
Yeah, I think, and that control is, I mean, it's sometimes perceived control. I think, yeah, if you're a part of a smaller and more nimble company, I'd like to think, Mary, like you are a little bit more in tune with your staff of workloads. I think I see the overloading happen more with larger agencies, larger companies that aren't necessarily a corporation yet, but are just, again, everyone wants to grow. The more events means more money for the business. And those are all good things, because then hopefully if you were full-time, they'd pay your salary more. But again, it can quickly become a lot. Mary, we touched on this a bit last week, but let's think about it from the contractor perspective. Like, what roles tend to work best as a contractor in the event world?
I think really many of the roles I think can be turned into contractor roles. For me, one of the harder ones is when it's a high level of pre-event planning. I think that makes it just a little more complicated because then you're working with someone who's a contractor for longer. So when you are contracting, it's just more time commitment, from yourself. And sometimes that's hard because you're managing other projects. So I think a limited pre-planning scope is usually helpful when I'm contracting, but it still works. So that's the thing. And as far as what other roles tend to work best, I would say those on-site day of roles are amazing, absolutely amazing for contractors and freelancers. I love them because I can just show up and, rock in a certain role. And there's usually a lot of need there as well. So those could be things like volunteer management, speaker management, maybe some stage management. It depends what kind of events you're doing, obviously. An event coordinator even. and supporting kind of in those ways. Did I say registration? That too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
registration manager. Those are all good key terms. Again, if you're listening to this and wanting to like Google or use AI to help you figure out more about what those folks do, but those are, again, the jargon's different. I mean, event assistant, I also feel like can mean a bunch of things, from like you're just getting coffee to like you're actually more probably even a stage manager, but they're just calling you an event assistant. Yeah, I think, and then anything specialized. I mean, you mentioned this, Mary, last week was like what I do, show calling. There are people out there that only show call and they're contractors for it. And so if you have a really complex show, meaning you need a lot of things to be happening on screen, moving parts, speakers coming in and out, all kinds of content, if you probably want to utilize somebody who is a specialist in show calling versus asking a team member who normally does coordinating or managing or event directing to like sit in that chair and try to figure out how to cue your team. So that's the other part of like filling some of that know-how gaps that you can work with certain specialists. And then sometimes it's just companies that are growing really fast, where like it could be anything. It could even be just as an event planner, having contractors. I also feel like there's been some subcontracting I've noticed between venues hiring event planners to come in to be their venue coordinator on a contract basis, or to be the recommended planner, but you're getting billed through the venue. So like those are some other avenues where I feel like I'm seeing subcontracting happening in events. I know there's plenty of hustles out there too that wouldn't use the word contractor, but like if you want to just be on-site staff, there's staffing agencies that have people sign up for those $20 to $30 an hour jobs, and you're mainly like a brand ambassador or wayfinding or something like that. And I don't think those people would like qualify it, like say they are contractors, but I count that in my bucket as then you're a contractor. And don't be afraid to do multiple different things. Like there's multiple people I can think of off the top of my head that would call themselves a contractor. They might do stage managing, they might do on-site execution from registration management to volunteer management, and they're also on some staffing agencies lists to sign up for shifts when it works for them. So you can kind of dabble in so many different avenues depending on your area, depending on how rigorous of a schedule you want. And that's, again, both exciting but could sound intimidating if you're someone who's like, Logan, Mary, I'm just getting started, where do I go? The answer is there's a lot of places.
Which is also exciting because like you said, there's so much variety. So this is a wonderful opportunity just to try things. So Logan, I think this is a really important question, everyone, for those that are listening. But how much should contractor, or how can you stand out as a contractor before you step on site?
Great question, Mary. This is again, there's so many different ways, but I feel like the core basics are: one, timely responses. We hit on this really hard last week, so go back and just listen to that episode. But essentially, in one sentence, when someone emails you and asks if you're available or texts you or call you, did you get back within 24 to 48 hours? Were you quick to respond? And then kept up that cadence, because nothing is worse than confirming someone and then not hearing anything from them, even in your pre-event communication. But then also just showing up on time and doing what was expected of you. You can strive for more and do above beyond what was expected of you, and that's great. But there's so many people that I have then worked with once, and maybe they were a volunteer or they got brought in at like a lesser role than they probably are experienced for. Maybe they came in as an assistant, event assistant, production assistant, and they're normally probably could be an assistant associate producer or a stage manager, but they started low just so I could get an experience being like, yeah, did they show up when I said call was at 7? Did they show up at 7? Or did they show up at 7:15 and couldn't figure out parking and they seem frazzled and have that energy? Did I ask them to handle these 3 things and they did? Maybe they asked some questions along the way. Questions are fine, but they did those things. Maybe they thought of another thing that they needed to solve and they already solved that and just let me know after that it happened. So I feel like that just helps you being on time, timely with your responses, doing what was asked of you, and then for me, just having a positive attitude. And again, you don't have to fake it and pretend everything's okay, but just knowing like one team, I'm so sports minded. It doesn't matter what I'm doing, if it's a corporate event or nonprofit or sports, but like one team, one dream. Like we're all here to help each other. And if we notice somebody needs an extra hand or a beat or a something, being that person that kind of like buys into that mentality, I think only makes you look better and then more likely to get hired. But Mary, what's your take on how do you think contractors can stand out on site?
Everything you said, and then also just someone who's really good at anticipating problems, like kind of without being an alarmist about it. They're just like a professional who can really understand and step into a situation and help solve a problem. Those are my favorite people, especially as a contractor. I think you have that power to do that because you're less emotionally connected to the event. And so sometimes you have that mindset to be able to solve those problems or come up with the solutions a little better. And so I just really appreciate that, whether that's on site or pre-event, it's them bringing their expertise to be able to help solve problems. And then also someone who I think understands or has like maybe, I don't know, maybe it's like enough emotional intelligence, I don't know, to understand the kind of like the chain of command, if you will. So understanding their role and who they are reporting to, you as a contractor are reporting to, because I have also been in situations where people come in and take over in a way that's actually semi-offensive, and it's not like the client gets confused about who everyone is. And so I think it's really understanding your role and what you need to be doing and who you're reporting to as well.
Yeah, and that's a good one of, yeah, if you're as a contractor just even asking that question of kind of, and like I probably to an annoying point love to ask scenarios. If I can do that before I'm on site versus being on site, that's even better. But just of like, yeah, hey, if we're running behind, what do you want me to ask you that? Do you want me to solve it? Is that a client question? Or even just like, hey, if client has a question, and I've done this, like I can't give that answer. Like if they want to add something, it's not something me, Logan, could answer because I'm subcontracted to someone. I need to direct them to who, and knowing that like, oh, I that's a great question. I'm going to have you check with Mary on that. Or do you want me to call her? I can ask Mary like while you're standing here, and just knowing like what's your role to play, I would say is really important. Mary, how much should contractors be pitching themselves versus letting their work speak for themselves?
This is an interesting question. In our last episode, we were talking about the struggle, at least that I've been having hiring contractors because even if they've been recommended to me. So based off that conversation from last time, I would say that you should be prepared to pitch yourself as well. I think it's amazing when your work can speak for itself. That's like so cool. And it's so cool that people respect you, that they'll just put your name out there. But be prepared to pitch yourself in a way where you, I don't know, could give some specific examples or what I love is when people are able to share, like, I don't know, some past like events that they actually were a part of, and like an interview question, like how they solved something that was an issue. Something else that I've loved is when they send me over like a one pager. We've talked about this before about how they can support at different events. I love that so much because I have a hard time remembering what everybody can help with. Even if I talk to you and I think you're awesome, you can still send me something, even if you were recommended. It helps you stand out even more. And so those are, I guess, the things that I would say. Logan, what about you? How much should contractors be pitching themselves versus letting their work speak for themselves to you?
I think pitching is so important. And the longer you've been doing something, maybe the less you have to do this. Again, I've been in business for 10 years. And when I was first starting, I was just constantly pitching because I didn't have much work to speak for itself. Now that I've been in it 10 years, I definitely get more leads than I can do. So that's a great problem to have. But there's still new events I want to go after. So I'm still out there pitching myself, or new introductions of, again, the best thing that happens. Someone loves you from working with you on site at one event. They want to introduce you to another agency or another company, and that can lead to more business. So I'm constantly pitching. I think my annoyance with a pitch is I don't love a contractor who just name drops all the fancy events they've done or all the fancy people they've worked with, because I laugh. While that's helpful to know that you've worked with Oprah, what did you do for Oprah? Did Oprah just walk by you and you're just name dropping Oprah? Or like, did you have to find Oprah's favorite flavor of jelly bean last minute? Like, that's different to me than Oprah was present at my event. So I think anytime you can provide specifics, and maybe, yes, name dropping one or two to show the scale, but then being like, oh, Mary, you're trying to work on this pharmaceutical event. In the last year, I've worked a couple pharma events, so I'm really comfortable working in their like lingo and understanding how their comms teams works compared to their executives who are actually on stage. Like, I'm super comfortable with that dynamic. Like, that's a better answer to me than I worked this famous pharmaceutical event, because that doesn't tell me much then about what you did at the event.
I mean, that's hilarious because in events, we all work with some pretty cool people sometimes. So that really actually literally means nothing, even though it sounds cool. So
Yeah, I'm like,
in that
I could
regard.
say Snoop Dogg was at the event I was at. Oh, by the way, it was the Olympics, but did I interact with Snoop Dogg? No. So like that doesn't, and I love celebrating our wins, but I just think the more likely you are going to get hired is if you can speak to what you did. I will also say, when you're pitching yourself, my current advice I give anybody when they come and pick my brain or do a coffee with me is, I need you to pick something specific that you like about events, or what, if you don't even know what your true superpower is, pick something specific at events, or a skill that you are like, this is my favorite thing. You don't have to say this is my jam. Both Mary and I probably say it too much, but we love it. This is my jam. Because just saying I'm interested in events, after I meet with you, I'm not going to remember that. It's too vague. But saying like, I love solving attendee problems, so I'm really comfortable at a registration table or directing folks, like directing attendees of where to go. That lets me know, okay, cool, I'm thinking of you when I'm thinking of someone who's attendee facing. Or I'm a graphics operator when it comes to the production world. Or I even just think I'm really good under pressure and I love, I can do quick cues. I did theater, so that's actually really helpful. And I'm like, okay, that's a stage manager in my head. So, and it's okay to evolve and change. I think some people are afraid to say something and then 6 months later change their mind. That's totally fine. But I think you have to say what in your pitch, what's your special sauce? What's your something that, again, other people can do what you do. That's fine. But just being specific at events, I love doing this. And that'll help you stay in that person's mind that you're trying to pitch yourself to, versus just being a generalist. And you're open to say, I'm into this, but I'm also willing to do whatever you got, Mary. I'd love to work with you in any capacity, in any way. But you at least have to have something that anchors that. Like, I'm Mary's producer, show caller, stage manager person, but she also knows I'll probably flex and do other things. But like, that's the anchor that I want her to think of me first for those things.
I love what you said. I think that's such a great point. Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more. So with that in mind, Logan, what questions should contractors ask before saying yes to an event?
Oh, listeners. Had to learn this the hard way once when I said yes to an event coming out of COVID. That was like, are you available in May? Like most of May? And I'm like, yeah, wide open in May. And they're like, great, we need you to be an executive producer. And I said, great. And then I forgot to ask exactly what dates in May. And so I'm on my first client call and they're going through the event dates. And it's like, all right, so this event is May 2nd through 7th. I'm like, great, easy. And then they go 10th through 15th. I'm like, oh no, 2 weeks. 17th through 24th. I was like, oh my gosh. Then there's like 27 to 29. And I was like, I just signed up. And at this point, I've been introduced to the client. So it's like, I'm in too deep. But essentially, I signed up for like a month-long virtual event, unbeknownst to me. And it ended up being a Herculean lift. And it was a silly little thing in my brain that I was like, definitely just coming out of COVID and eager for work and just excited to work with this company. And I just didn't ask the dates. So very simply, make sure you ask the dates, double check they're inclusive if it's not in your home market or near your home. Is that inclusive of any rehearsal dates or travel dates or any other on-site dates? Like the event might be May 7th, but you actually probably need to be there May 3rd. You can't leave until May 8th. Like just making sure so you don't have any double booking. Also asking budget if they haven't asked for your rates. I think my favorite question when they ask, are you available for this event on this date? I say, yeah, I think it looks like I'm available. Can you tell me more about the role and any budget? I just want to, and my favorite line is, I want to make sure it aligns with my current availability and other commitments. Little last page, other commitments is like my key for just kind of trying to be like, I have other things happening, not deprioritizing yours, but that just helps me see where this fits in. And then that usually starts that dialogue of like what we talked about. That's so important. The scope, the role, actually what you're doing. What are the expectations? Because as Mary mentioned, a lot of contracting roles are day of only, but also I get approached for ones that aren't, that have pre-production, and they'll just say, oh, it has pre-production, meaning before on-site day, essentially. But that's big. That could be anywhere from 5 hours to I've had projects that take 300 hours. And those are two very different lifts. So that's where then if there's pre-production, it's like, great, are there specific calls? Would we be doing weekly check-ins? Like, when would this kick off? I've had some projects that are in June and they want to start doing meetings in February. Had others that have an event in June and they want to meet the week before in June. Like, it's just starting to get answers to those questions can help you before you actually sign a contract and commit, making sure you're having those details. Mary, what would you add to questions they should ask before they say yes?
Yeah, I would add that normally I like to ask who I'm working with directly, because it really does paint a picture on. Sometimes I have these conversations and I'm like, so am I in charge or is someone else? Like, it's hard to tell, So I'm like, I really just need to know my lane, like we were kind of talking about before. So it's, who am I working with? Like, who is the decision maker? Who are things being escalated to? And yeah, I need to know if it's me. So that's definitely one. The other one is if I hear, normally they'll mention it in some way or another. They'll talk about how they've done this in the past, or something like that. And I'm like, okay, so who helped you with this in the past? So I asked them, have you hired for this role in the past, like externally through as a contractor? And then they'll usually say, oh, yeah. And, it didn't work out because of this. And I'm like, that's what I want to know. I want to know why it didn't work out. And usually people are very, thoughtful in how they say it, but they're also usually willing to share, which I really appreciate because I know, okay, that's either going to be a potential issue for me too. It sounds like, the scope's going to be crazy. So that's good to know. Or it sounds like, there are just things I can be aware of that I can make sure not to do. And so I really love asking both of those questions to start as well.
Yes, that's so valuable of knowing who did it before, if they've ever been a freelancer or a contract. Has the person before you been a contractor or an internal person? That's another one I had to learn the hard way for a project where we had some misalignment of expectations. And a lot of it came back to they were used to it being a full-time person who was just always on call versus a freelance role. And I've said it on the podcast before, but just putting it in this episode because it's relevant, is always asking, is this a time-based role or a task-based role? And that's really only applies to events that are like, there's pre-production involved, there's pre-planning involved, there's hours before you're on site together involved. That's when I just would ask to make sure, is the time-based, meaning, are you expecting me to be online and available to get pinged at any time between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Pacific, or again, whatever time zone you're in? Or is it task-based where it's more like, hey, Mary and I met, I just need this thing by Thursday, anytime between now and Thursday, you can get it done, or Monday of next week, you can get it done. And those are two very different things as a contractor, because maybe you're on site for another event, but you could still get that thing done at 11 p.m. at night or 8 a.m. in the morning before you have to go on site. But if they're trying to ping you, which is in a situation I had while I was on site for another event, I was getting messages in that specific agency's messaging app that was not one that I normally check. That was one of those misalignments of, expecting you just to be standing by and watching for pings. So just something to think about.
All right, for our next question, Logan, what is the difference between being helpful and versus overstepping as a contractor?
I want your take on this.
Yeah,
I want your hot take on this, because I think for me, it's, again, that sounds like what you've experienced more of, like coming in and just owning. The hard part is the roles I do with like show calling is I am supposed to come in overstep. I'm supposed to come in and by overstep, I mean, I'm supposed to just come in and like take charge of a crew. But part of my process is I always first, like, whoever hired me, it's like, who was my point of contact? Okay, it's the producer in the room. Great. I'm going to go in. It just happened on a show earlier this month. It's like, hi, I'm Logan. I'm the show caller. Let me know. Like, I'm reporting to them essentially, but it's like, my plan is, and I kind of lay out of like, I'm going to go around and introduce myself to the crew, let them know I'm the show caller, but like, we're on your schedule. We're on your timing. You let me know when I'm ready, when I'm good to start like stepping through stuff with people. And that's me kind of trying to show them what I would do, but also like acquiescing if they already had a plan baked in. And that's worked for me. Same thing with stage managing. I check in with the show caller or producer. And again, it's like, here's what I'm thinking I need to do, but what did you have something already for me? Something like a schedule or something I have to stick to. So showing I have initiative and I'm able to know what I'm doing, but also like following them. Mary, what's the difference for you of being helpful and overstepping?
I think there's just like such value in being able to be the type of person that can just watch and kind of see what's going on. Obviously, we get thrown in some situations where you have to have fast action. That's a lot of what events are. But I do believe that there are moments when you could just like read the room. You know what I mean? Like get there, figure out, like Logan's saying, who the people are, who you're working with. And I love introducing myself to like whoever is in charge, because I feel like really quickly you can tell if they're stressed out or not. And so I'm like, again, this is all just information that you're quickly gathering because you show up on site and you figure this out. And so, yeah, I think there's extreme value in just watching, and seeing for a second. And then you can see pretty quickly where you fit in. And so if you are able to take the time and do that, I think that's when you know where you can be helpful versus overstepping. It's like Logan was saying earlier too, or I guess we both were kind of saying, don't assume any of your authority, talk about it. But I have to say, I've been in a situation before where it was for a fundraising event, but my role wasn't over everything. But I saw that there was like an issue that was occurring over a certain area that I like could help with. And so I'm trying to watch, and listen. And what I hear is that there's 3 different people making a different system for this situation. I don't know why I'm being so vague. It was for helping with checkout and organizing a silent auction. And so there's 3 different people who were like making the rules about this. And I'm just sitting here like, ooh, I probably wouldn't do that. Ooh, I don't know if that's a good idea, but I'm not saying anything. And so finally you could tell the people were getting frustrated because they would start doing work and then someone would correct them. And then it's like, wait a minute, who's in charge? So anyway, so I went over there and I was like, here's what I would suggest, if that's all right. And I gave them my suggestion and they were like, thank you. We just need somebody to be in charge. And I'm like, cool, this really wasn't my role, but I'm glad that worked out for you. So I'm not saying that's always the case. But I think that you can tell when there are moments when you actually are going to be helpful and just don't be, I don't know, a lot of it's just intelligence. I feel like don't be hot headed and just be helpful. There you go.
Yeah, I think that, and that's one, like for me, overstepping, you just triggered for me, Mary, like thinking, like sometimes it's client asking, can we add this? And my favorite phrase is like, well, that's above my, it's, well, like or what do you think personally, can we make this change? And I know in my head, like this will probably cost money. I will then be like, personally, this is maybe what I would think, but I'd have to check with the higher ups of just kind of what that process looks like. So I'm not promising, because in my world, overstepping is like, I say, yes, we can do this thing. And it actually costs an extra $2,000. And client didn't know that because I just said yes. So I will never say yes. I would instead kind of do that, let me check with others kind of thing. In more candid places, when I'm like with an AV team and they want to add equipment, I'd laugh as the show caller. I'm always like, that's above my pay grade. I have no budgetary decisions I can make. I can ask what's possible right now. If you need more money to like bring in this other equipment solution or this other person, like I have to escalate that to the person who hired me, because I cannot be the one responsible for saying, yes, we added this. And then later the client gets hit with a bill no one knew about. So that's for me, overstepping is like anything budgetary. I just will like be like, I can't make that call. I love that idea. I can't make that call though. Here's who I need to go check with somebody else. Mary, last question here, but probably one of the more important questions of this episode is, how do you talk about your rates professionally as a contractor?
Yeah. So when I'm talking to somebody, it's kind of depends on who gets to that question first, but it's usually something that comes up during like an initial call. So either they're asking or I'm asking what rate they have for the event. Or they're asking me, what's your rate for the event? I would say more times than not, though, I'm asking them, what is your rate for the event? But I appreciate, from the other side, when people have some number in mind. I think that's one piece of advice, is just have something in mind versus saying, well, I'll do whatever. But it's really helpful to hear when there's a minimum. So I try to do that too. Like typically this is my rate. And usually I give them a range. So something like that. I would say it's not really that awkward when you have an answer. I think what makes it more uncomfortable for people is when you're like, well, I don't know, like I'm flexible, because you just want to get the gig, but like just tell them your rate. Half the time they like have flexibility, or maybe sometimes they haven't even completely booked it yet and they could still advocate for your rate. And so I think that's when you just have to make the call to say, here's what I typically do, but I'm willing to do, whatever you need or whatever you want to say. So I think advocate, be flexible, and that's just how I talk about it. And I have to be honest, it hasn't really been much of a problem. I haven't had to push back on it entirely too much. I would also say shoot your shot, because there have been some roles that are like kind of, I don't know how I describe them, but they're bigger companies. And so I've bumped up my rate a little bit and I've seen what they've said and they say yes. So you just never know. Logan, what would you add? You're really good at talking about your rates. So what would you add?
Oh, thanks, Mary. I don't feel like I'm good at talking about my rates, but I've gotten better. I will say that. Money forever makes my palms sweaty. It just does. And I've learned to deal with it. But yeah, I think similar to the trick that came from a negotiating book that we read, and you might have been doing that before then, but that's how I started doing it, of giving the range is helpful, because then you're not like really outpricing someone, but you're also showing that your work is valuable. So if I was earlier in the production world, I might say my day rate is, $300 to $500. And then ideally they're going to come back in and say, oh, our budget is $400 or $450. Great. They're in the window. But to Mary's point, you could also say, yeah, but I'm new to this kind of event, or I really, really want to work with you, so I'm willing to be flexible based on budget. For me in the production sphere, it's really important also to define, that's a 10-hour, if a day rate's like a 10-hour day, or if it's all inclusive. Again, a lot of my sports stuff, I don't get overtime. It's just the day rate is what you get for the day. It doesn't matter if your day was 8 hours or 15 hours. Corporate world and other, like even nonprofit world, I try to make any overtime for when I'm hiring contractors. I try to put that inclusive in the project rate, but I do pay overtime even for nonprofit, because corporate, not overtime, is that's the thing. It's you do 10-hour days. Overtime is 1.5 times your hourly rate for anywhere, a thing that's between 10 to 12-hour days. If you go over 12-hour days, you're in double time, which is double your hourly rate. This is very normal for in-house AV teams. I used to get really annoyed with the idea of overtime and double time just because it makes things really expensive really fast. I've come around where I'm very much an advocate that like it's a financial penalty for a reason, because you're making people work really long days. And usually this happens when you have multiple days in a row. And now you're making your team tired and you're putting your show at risk. So it's a financial penalty to help the client avoid having you there on site for really long days. But I've just found as a contractor, it's helpful to like say that, like, hey, my day rate is whatever it is, $800, $900, and that's a 10-hour day. And then I do overtime and double time after that. Or you can just say, this is my day rate. And I also want to inquire, like, what's your standard overtime thing? So I think just saying it verbally, being like, to Mary's point, being ready to say it in a meeting. And how I got better at it was I literally practiced writing it. I think my original rate hike that I did was saying I'm a $75 an hour planner. And I literally wrote that like multiple times in a notebook to practice it. I practiced saying it out loud because I would giggle when I first did it. Like, because I didn't even believe it really. I was like, this is so much money. I'd been charging like 35 years ago. So that helped it. And then, yeah, writing it out in emails. Again, it's very common for them to say, hey, what are your standard rates? And again, giving that range in writing just helps. And that alone has given me, 20, 30% pay bumps for things, because they'll give me a number and I'll say, that's great. I really want to work with you in the team. My rate is normally $50 more to $150 more. And I say those full numbers. And then I've actually had them come back and say, great, yeah, we found money. We'll meet you in the middle of that. And I was like, one email just made me 20% more. Like, that's so great. So yeah, I think you just need to know you're the best advocate for yourself. Make sure you know your rates, and then don't forget to raise them. And I'm not saying exponentially raise them, but just like each year, inflation's a thing. Stuff is getting more expensive. And that is something I had a bad habit of. I had one agency, I think my rate was the same for like 4 years, because they were my first stretch client where I had to I really bumped it up on them. And then I realized, I was like, oh, I haven't raised my rates. We need to do that. So start of the year is a good time to do it. All right, Mary, last question here. Any burnout or boundary tips for frequent event contractors?
Ooh, I mean, this could be its own episode, so I guess we'll try to keep it brief. Event contracting can be really hard. It can be taxing. It can be multi-days, which sometimes is exhausting. So we've talked about on here some tips about things to bring to your event, things that make you comfortable, because you're working for other people. So sometimes it's hard to control situations. So bring your snacks that you like, bring your drinks that you like, just be prepared just in case. And then for me, something that I've learned as a contractor is that I've learned my personal capacity about how many back-to-back events that I can do. And so I did like 3 back-to-back last year. It was like 15 days of travel, which Logan is like, just another week. But for me, I was like, I'm never doing that again. That was way too much back-to-back. And so I think figuring out that capacity and kind of what's starting to feel like burnout for you, and to build your boundaries around that. One of the things as a contractor that I've always loved to do is to extend my time a little bit so I can spend time in the area that I'm in, because I'm like, when else am I going to be in Georgia? I'm going to go look at something. But that also over time has become too much. So just, make the call, try to find joy in it, whether that's extending your time or just saving time to be home in between. So those are my pieces of advice. Logan, what about you? Any burnout or boundaries tips?
Yeah, I think with you of extending, or for me, a magic thing last year was like adding on time to see family that was in the area or any close friends. Even just a day or a half day really felt like my travel then was intentional. And then for me, movement has become a really big way for me to prevent burnout. It sounds counterintuitive, but I've learned getting a workout in like the morning before I have a really tough on-site day just puts me at this higher sphere of thinking. And I actually feel like I'm faster and smarter with what I do. Even if my body's tired, it's just like those happy endorphins, or even just a minimum having walking outside in the morning if you have a chance to, because you're about to then be inside all the time. So I think that's really helped me with my burnout cycle. And then touching base with my people. So for me, it's mainly my partner, just making sure that if it's not every day, every other day, having a phone call and just checking in with the outside world when I'm in a particularly brutal event. And that can just be really helpful, again, to ground you and remind you there's life outside of the ballroom or the event space or whatever you're working in. And to Mary's point, yeah, you're figuring out whatever your own personal capacity is. I wish I could tell you there was a formula that if you do these number of events, if you charge this, you will be successful and happy and thriving. And that's just not the case. It's very different. I admit that my schedule is other people's nightmares. It works for me for now in the season that I'm in. So I'm going to keep doing it. And I know other folks who don't travel as much, but still have a pretty rigorous schedule, and they're happy as well. So it's really kind of like you get to make it what you want, which is the beauty of contractors. But I would make sure you have some practice in your life on the road or at home in busy event season. That is something that prevents burnout, helps your body come out of that fight or flight mode, out of de-stress, decompress. It could be baths. It could be snuggling your dog or your cat. It could just be like something. And I will say Mary knows this because we were texting about it. I had a really tough show at the start of this year, and I brought my twinkle lights, my little fairy lights that are battery powered, and they can run on a timer. And I set them up in my hotel room, which I always think, I'm sure the housekeeping folks think it's so nerdy, but I had some really long days, and it was just the smile I got on my face opening my hotel room door at like midnight or 1 a.m. and just seeing these little twinkle lights lit up was worth it. And that's like, I swear they were like $5. So doesn't have to be fancy, doesn't have to be fun. We hope you learned something new about event contracting. We will probably continue to hit on this topic because it is a popular one. But Mary, you have our bonus tip this week.
I do. All right. So for our bonus tip today, this is a tip for something that you can have in your event kit, which we always love. That event kit just keeps growing and growing. You could have lots of things. But recently I was introduced to T-pins. You may already know what T-pins are or use them, but they were not in my event kit until I had a colleague give me some recently. And I was like, wow, oh my gosh, these are amazing. So T-pins are basically, you could Google it. They're T-shaped pins, like a flat head and a sharp point. And they're really great if you need to like pin back fabric or just do something like that because they aren't noticeable. So it's different than like a binder clip, or something that you could use like that. So T-pins are wonderful. Even for your AV tech table, Logan, T-pins might be a good thing. So there's your bonus tip for today.
Amazing. We will link to those in the show notes so you can just take a look at what Mary's thinking and add it to your event kit. Thank you, Mary. As always, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Better Events Pod. You can send us an email at bettereventspod@gmail.com. You can always connect with Mary and I directly on LinkedIn. We love hearing from you. Just let us know in the note when you hit connect that you heard about us through the podcast. And if you want more Better Events content, join our private community on Substack. And as always, we want to thank you for listening, and we'll be back in your feeds again next Wednesday.